Hi, everyone, and welcome to the opening of the special exhibition, LaToya M. Hobbs, It's Time. This event marks the beginning of the scholarship and academic discourse around Hobbs's work that will take place here at Harvard while this show is on view. Professor Jones, Kéla Jackson, and LaToya Hobbs have prepared erudite remarks to initiate our conversation today and to jumpstart the work we will all do collectively in our shared conversations and reflections on the prints titled Carving Out Time. So let's begin. Our first speaker today is Jovonna Jones, who is an assistant professor of African American literature and culture at Boston College. She teaches and researches Black visual culture, Black feminist criticism, and the built environment. Her writing has been published in Aperture, Souls, Callaloo, Southern Cultures, and by the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. Jovonna is currently working on a book entitled The Last Thanksgiving at West Rutland Square. It tells the story of her grandmother and 11 other elderly Black women who fought to save their brownstone apartment building in the midst of Boston's gentrifying South End in the 1980s. Can't wait to read that. She is also at work on the visual and architectural study of Black women's rooming houses across the United States, homes that were organized at the turn of the 20th century to house Black women migrating to new cities for work, education, and fresh beginnings. Jovonna is the recipient of fellowships from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, and Dartmouth College. She holds her Ph.D. and MA from Harvard University and her BA from Emory University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jones to the podium.
I'm just going to say this, my heart is beating out of my chest, and it's weird because I went here for many years. So I'm like, this is home. Why is my heart beating out of my chest? I realize this is the first time I've actually had to talk about an artist's work in front of the artist, not just the artist, her partner, not just her partner, their 2 children. And so this is why I work on our ancestors and not as much as I love contemporary art. This is new for me. And so I want to frame this, as I told you, LaToya, earlier, that this is a meditation on, I think, reflection with how I felt when I beheld your work last week. So thank you, Elizabeth, for this invitation and our early conversations about LaToya's work over Zoom and during install. Thank you, Kéla, for being my art history homie and an ongoing thought partner in Black feminist art. And thank you again, LaToya, who I'll refer to you as Hobbs for the rest of this, for your generosity of skill and intimacy in your work. I'm honored to be in conversation with you about it. When I entered the gallery to see Hobbs' monumental prints based on her woodcuts, I shrank. The precision of LaToya Hobbs' hand overwhelmed me. I tried to describe this sensation to my older sister Jazz on FaceTime yesterday. Tried to capture the sheer volume of marks and carvings required to replicate and reimagine her family's living spaces and routines. Okay, so on the video they showed, I started, she's like right in front of the wood, face right there, has this little scalpel tool she uses to carve each mark out of the wood. All of them, Jazz, all the marks. I repeat, shaking the phone. I remember Hobbs has collaborators, of course, so multiple hands made this work possible. From her partner, artist Arison Jack, to her kids, to her printers from Big Ink, many hands were involved. Still, the image I hold close is that still from the video. Hobbs' face so close to the material, the smell and taste of dust and ink. The artist speaks to us over this studio footage. Just as working people, parents, whatever your walk of life is, she says, we all have to have these days in negotiations where we ask, how am I going to get all of these things done with the time that I have? Carving Out Time is a series of scenes depicting slices of this family's life, the time they make for each other and spend together. But Carving Out Time is also Hobbs' offering from the sacred time she spends with herself within and close to the work. That we might recognize a Black woman's household work as both life-sustaining and creative was precisely what Alice Walker wanted for her own mother. In her seminal 1972 essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Walker writes about the creative life force of Black mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers exploited for their domestic labor and leaving their artistic marks, quote, in the only materials she could afford and in the only medium her position in society allowed her to use, end quote. She saw how this burden surfaced in her sharecropper mother in fields from before sun up to late night. She writes that her mother never had a moment to sit down undisturbed, to peruse her own private thoughts. Something always interrupted her, either work or the inquiries of her children, Walker remembering that she's one of them. So Walker went in search of the secret of what fed her mother from whom so much had been required. She wanted to see how her mother indulged her vibrant, creative spirit, she says, and where that spirit pops out. It is only in adulthood when Walker finds her mother's studio. She writes, "The artist that was and is my mother showed itself to me only after many years. This is what I finally noticed. My mother adorned with flowers whatever shabby house we were forced to live in. And not just your typical straggly country strands of zinnia either. No, she planted ambitious gardens, and still does, with over 50 different varieties of plants that bloom profusely." When did her mother find the time, I wonder? Walker continues, "Before she left home for the fields, she watered her flowers, chopped up the grass, and laid out new beds. When she returned from the fields, she might divide clumps of bulbs, dig a cold pit, uproot and replant roses, or prune branches from her taller bushes or trees, until night came and it was too dark to see." Walker describes her mother's tending with such microscopic detail that the garden becomes a world unto itself, damp and unwieldy and curious to her mother's hands. Walker writes, "Whatever she planted grew as if by magic, and her fame as a grower of flowers spread over 3 counties. The daughter remembers the people coming to enjoy what her mother had made. She says, I remember people coming to my mother's yard to be given cuttings from her flowers. I hear again the praise showered on her because whatever rocky soil she landed on, she turned into a garden so brilliant with colors, so original in its design, so magnificent with life and creativity that to this day, people drive by our house in Georgia, perfect strangers and imperfect strangers, and ask to stand or walk among my mother's art." Even with all of this external validation of her gardening craft, Alice Walker notices that it is only when her mother's working in the garden that she is radiant. She says she's radiant almost to the point of being invisible, except as creator. I pause here in my reading. Walker says it's only in the garden when her mother appears radiant like this, which kind of makes me sad. It makes me wish her mother could look and feel just as radiant elsewhere in her life, in her home, with her family. And maybe she did, but Walker couldn't see that multiplicity as a child. Creative solitude is what excites the writer Alice Walker that we know. The solitude is what excites her the most, reminds her of what she herself has inherited and orchestrated her life around. I hear Walker's Black feminist thinking echo in Hobbs' scenes, which begin in the home and arrive in the studio, another kind of garden. But Hobbs gives us a third option, beyond the duality of sacrificial motherhood and solitary artistry. She makes art that can't be held without holding all of her and her people too. Art that bears an integrated Black woman's self, supported, safe, and seen. How thrilling it must be for the children, Ade and Theo, to know that the same hands that pull them up onto the bed, turn their heads back to the homeschool lesson, bring dinner to the table, and hold the book at bedtime, made these carvings right here, taking up all this space in places miles and miles from home. Those same hands here in scene 1, reaching up towards morning light. Hobbs holds a moment of inner respite in her face. Her eyes are closed. She must hear her son cozy into her partner's arms as he wakes up. I wonder how long the kids have been awake, judging the right time to descend on their parents. Her child climbs over her legs, headed for her lap while she stretches. He balances over her calves, making sure not to crush her upturned feet or loosely bent knees. That's an art in itself, learning how to collapse onto your mother in the morning. I remember the choreography well when I linger in this scene. Anybody who has children can relate to this work, Hobbs says in the video from the studio. And anybody who was a child, which is everybody, she laughs, you can relate to this work. The practices that go into Hobbs' homemaking draw on the same imaginative and attentive capacities as the labor of the studio: painting, mixing, carving. The art is in making something that lives. And how privileged are we to have LaToya Hobbs woodcuts, or Prince of the Woodcuts, living here for a while. Thinking with Alice Walker has helped me to characterize my awe when I saw them for the first time. We can't walk away with cuttings like neighbors in Alice Walker's mother's garden, but Hobbs gives us something I can inhabit, burrowing into its earth, lingering in its grooves, and carving out space for myself here, too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jovonna. Our second speaker today is Kéla Jackson, who's a doctoral candidate at Harvard in the Department of the History of Art and Architecture. Working at the intersection of art history, visual culture, and Black studies, Kéla's dissertation focuses on ruptural aesthetics, collage, constructed photography, and quilting as modes of remaking narratives around Black girls and Black girlhood. Her writing has been published in Boston Art Review, the Panorama Journal of American Art, as well as various exhibition catalogs. In addition to research and writing, Kéla co-organized the 2021 conference titled Art Museums and the Legacies of the Dutch Slave Trade, Curating Histories, Envisioning Futures, which will be published as an edited volume through Brill next year, or actually this year, 2020.
This year, yeah.
Kéla received her undergraduate degree from Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. During her studies, she held positions at the High Museum of Art and at the Spelman Museum of Fine Art. Currently, Kéla is a Terra Foundation predoctoral fellow in American art at the Smithsonian Museum of American Art and National Portrait Gallery. And Kéla also has contributed extensively to museum work since her arrival in the doctoral program here, just as Jovonna did as a graduate intern here at the museum while she was a student. Please join me in welcoming Kéla to the podium.
If you listen closely, you can hear my heart beating just like Jovonna. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this generous invitation. I want to thank Jovonna because you are a friend of my mind. We've been through this together for a long time. But most importantly, I want to thank LaToya for giving us this wonderful offering, such a rich and vulnerable vision of your life that you shared that mirrors many of our own. And with that, I will begin. Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the earth have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under the foot of man. Matthew 5:13. The question that I think we're left with is what preserves those who preserve? Ye are the salt of the earth. Black women are the keepers of culture, family, and history, and memory. But if the salt lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and trodden under the foot of man. There is merely a designation as custodian, keeper, and protector, but a notable absence of how she, in my words, is to sustain such a position, only the repercussion of the failure to savor. It is the space between designation and potential displacement within which LaToya Hobbs considers the means and methods by which Black women can maintain cultural identities. It is in this absence that she crafts a vision of what it means to keep and be kept through beauty. Hobbs, through her deftly and dexterously rendered 15-panel narrative arc, meditates upon what Christina Sharp considers beauty as method. Sharp asks, what might beauty open, rupture, make possible and impossible? Hobbs's response, carving time, makes legible beauty as a concept and a method. Thus, beauty as method functions as a principled gesture of making possible a breaking open of space that trains our eyes and attention. Making beauty is the interior act of attentiveness carried through in every careful articulation of Hobbs's gouge. Sharp opens up beauty as a means by which we determine possibility. Hobbs inserts her work as one of the many possibilities yielded through. As an apparatus, beauty is our willingness to bring forth our visions, our hopes, and our desires. The monumental 5-part ensemble is a feast for the eyes, as she brings us into relief the narrative of her life as a mother, as a wife, as a professional educator. The list seems to go on. Hobbs's focus on home evinces a specific type of preservation orchestrated within the domestic space. Hobbs envelops us in a masterfully rendered ode to the spectacle of the quotidian. Undergirding carving time is the question, or rather amplification, of the aesthetic negotiations of form and concept. Hobbs's lines dance before our eyes, coalescing into sumptuous forms, figures, and patterns that construct her various scenes. Similar care struggles the moments where lines dissolve to swallow us in absence. She offers up the home space as a place in which beauty abounds. As method, beauty is about a transfiguration of the given, to borrow the words of Saidiya Hartman. This metamorphosis happens before our eyes as Hobbs carves space and time in such a rigorous manner that the world literally opens up before us. To conjure beauty is a labor that gives back. It is a labor that is sustaining. Hobbs's endeavor to make beauty in such a grand scale relies on the notion that making and taking space is crucial to Black feminist art historical practices. So we enter at the height of her narrative arc, gathering around the kitchen table, the nexus of actions and exchanges. The table invites us to the scene, yet while the interlocking and largely disavowing gazes of the actors present us with a distance. In this moment, we're engaging past and present through a structuring of the scene as a meta-picture, citing artistic and aesthetic inherences, while also gesturing to what might lie beyond the frame. Valerie Maynard's Sinufo rhymes perfectly with Hobbs stilled at mid-stride as she balances dinner on the way to the table. The horizontal striations of the seriograph intersect with the vertical counterparts on the wall. In her appropriation of Maynard's work, Hobbs asserts an aesthetic inheritance both in Maynard and in West African figuration and mark-making, a connection reiterated through her use of Adinkra symbols. The work of the interior, as she shows, Black feminist interiority, is to establish links to the past, the present, and the future. She cements herself within an artistic lineage of Maynard, under her auspice and in step with her vision. To the left of Maynard, Hobbs includes Carrie James Marshall's club couple, placed just above the family dinner table. Her referencing of Marshall evinces a tango between concept and form, folding past into present. The entangled pair allude to a younger Jackson and Hobbs. In this manner, the dimly lit club and cocktails is now their Baltimore home, where the kitchen table is the heart. In this manner, Hobbs is crafting a narrative that extends beyond the 24 hours of a given day. The narrative portrait collapses the worlds and places to construct a larger arc of her life, her family, her love. The connection between the couple now extends through the bodies of their children. As the backdrop of the work, Hobbs articulates Marshall's work as the aesthetic foundation, but also their love as the foundation of their family life. After dinner, Hobbs transitions us to the children's room. Deep within the pictorial plane, Hobbs wedges herself in a moment with her son. The work of her husband, sons, and Basquiat's Pez dispenser form a constellation above their heads. Here again, the walls not only open up into a world beyond the gallery space, but evidence in opening up the world for the children. The interior is a space through which we imagine and build worlds beyond what we can see. It's brought to the fore in this moment. Nearly missed beneath the scattered toys, Hobbs inserts the details of the Sankofa bird, a gesture to work as reaching back and looking forward. Further, the melding of the worlds, cultures, and languages within the domestic space complicates renderings of Black family and interiority. Finally, we reach Hobbs' studio. She's perched atop a stool, confidently looking back at us, donning a smock and discarding the beloved fuzzy slippers. There's a character shift in this moment. She balances a palette and a brush with the gouges in a woodblock close to her feet. The proximity of materials evidence her complex practice as she moves between forms and methods. Here she is establishing her own prowess as an artist. Aside from her posture akin to that of Marshall's own Black woman artist, the scene holds only references to Hobbs' work and practice. The multitude of canvases that rest against the wall create or evince her sheer prolific talent, but also foreground her commitment to beauty as she envisions Black women. Referencing an earlier work, Birth of a Mother, Hobbs finds ways to bring forth her capacity as a mother and artist, even in the studio space. Seated in a cross-legged position, donning a robe that bears her expectant belly, Hobbs meditates on motherhood and childbirth as equally a birth of the self. Hobbs schematically recreates her acrylic and collage wood panel of nieces Erin and Anaya just over her shoulder. In the earlier version, Hobbs patterns the girl's dresses in an Adinkra symbol resembling an Afro pick that represents beauty and femininity. The pair, entangled much like the flora that backgrounds them, conjures a sense of intimacy and closeness. The day ends with making. It ends with labor that is required to make beauty exist in the space that it ruptures. Hobbs addresses us in a manner that implicates us as her subjects, leaving us to consider what her making of beauty might open. How might we exist in the space of possibility or even impossibility that she creates?
Thank you, Kéla. I'd like to just take a moment and have a round of applause for these amazing scholars that they've given us today. Thank you. And thanks to them for carving out time from their dissertation and their book projects and their publications for this work and for this event. Thank you. And now it's my joy to introduce the final speaker today, the artist who brought us carving out time and who's one of the most generous collaborators I've ever had the privilege to work with, LaToya M. Hobbs. She's an artist, wife, and mother of two. And LaToya received her BA in painting from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and an MFA in printmaking from Purdue University. To quote from her exquisite website, LaToya's work deals with figurative imagery that addresses the ideas of beauty, cultural identity, and womanhood as they relate to women of the African diaspora, end quote. Her paintings and prints are housed in numerous private and public collections, including the Harvard Art Museums now. And her work has been featured in many exhibitions worldwide, at the Baltimore Museum of Art, the State University of California at Stanislaus, the National Art Gallery of Namibia, and many other places. There's currently a major monographic exhibition of her work on view at the Frist Art Museum in Nashville, titled Carving a New Tradition, The Art of LaToya M. Hobbs. And stay tuned, another monographic show of her work will debut later this year at the Milwaukee Art Museum. LaToya has won several competitive art prizes and acclaimed residencies in her career thus far. She's a founding member of the Black Women of Print Collective and also a professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the artist to the podium.
Oh my God. First, I just want to say that, my heart is just full. So, I'm just really honored to, let me pull it together, sorry. I'm just really honored to be here. Thank you to Elizabeth, to all of the staff at Harvard for making this purchase possible, and also just being so gracious to me and my family during our time here. I don't want to comment on the speakers, because if I do, the tears will start flowing. So again, thank you all of you for being here today. As you know, I'm LaToya Hobbs. You've heard about the various roles that I play in my normal and everyday life. But for my portion of this talk, I wanted to take a moment just to give you a more holistic view of me as an artist. The work on display really shows myself as a printmaker, but I specifically define myself as a painter and printmaker. I'm very much interested in combining those two worlds together in a way that is symbiotic, so they kind of lean on each other and inform each other. And you'll see that kind of run throughout the images that I'm going to show. So the first image that I'm going to present to you today is titled Arc of Safety, Mother and Child. So it alludes to some of the major themes that I've been thinking about over the past few years. Really this idea of what it means to be a matriarch. And kind of telling the story of my journey into motherhood, which I purposely, as I mentioned to some of the donors today, I purposely kind of withheld that part of myself for various reasons. But now I feel like it's a time where I am able to just fully express all parts of myself, and that includes being a mother. It's like one of the primary roles that I have right now. It's such an all-encompassing part of my life right now. So quite naturally, it seeps into the work. This also gives me an opportunity to kind of talk about some of my influences within printmaking. So this is really similar to a work by Elizabeth Khaled, who I call one of my art mothers. And so this reference in particular was taken in this is Theo, this is Ade. He's about so this is like 2015, I believe. So we are caught in a moment of rest after nursing, probably by my husband, who is an artist and also a photographer. So I'm really fortunate that he's able to capture all these really wonderful images that I can then use as source material. So this photo was taken in 2015, but the work wasn't actually completed until last year. So it kind of gives you this full circle moment. And this work is also significant because it is in scene 5. So the wood block that's in progress in the floor. This is that work at the time. So it kind of gives you this full circle moment and also gives you kind of an example of like the traditional work that I do as a printmaker. This next work also is significant because it is featured in Carving Out Time, but I purposely wanted to include this piece for a couple of reasons. I think it's one of my favorite works right now, just one of my personal favorite pieces, but it also really gives you insight to what I mean about taking both my identity as a painter and a printmaker and putting them on the same surface. The part of myself as a printmaker that I really enjoy is the carving. So I'm taking that particular element and putting it kind of in the forefront of my work and kind of breaking the norm of what we tend to expect from a printmaker. Normally with your matrix is something that is not considered art, right? It's always in service of the edition that is going to be pulled from it. But I just find so much beauty in the block itself. So I really started to explore this idea of the matrix as the art object, right? Something that has value. It's not only just a production tool, but it is an art object in and of itself. So in this piece here, again, you see the carving, which is throughout the figures. So these marks that you see are literally me kind of carving away from the surface of this wood panel. And then I'm kind of incorporating other things as well. So you see the leaves that are painted and carved. The flowers, which are hydrangeas, are carved. There's collage in the figure's clothing. There's some hand painting on top. So I really enjoy this idea of taking these very different processes and putting them together on the same surface to kind of, I don't want to say bamboozle the viewer, but I really want you to spend some time with the work to figure out. And that's something that I particularly enjoy, not only as an artist, but also as an art observer and lover. I really enjoy just thinking about the processes of artists and sitting in front of their work and trying to decide, like, what did they do first? What did they do second? That's just something that I also really enjoy. I would say from a more, I don't want to say philosophical standpoint, the act of carving away for me represents this idea of carving away to reveal the true essence of a person. I can talk about like just kind of my identity as a Black woman. A lot of my earlier work was dealing with the idea of confronting stereotypes. Particularly through how we perceive beauty among Black women. So I find that we often have to shed these layers of expectations or assumptions that are put on us to kind of reveal the true version of ourselves. So when I'm approaching the wood blocks, I think of it in that way, almost like a sculptor. You hear some sculptors talk about like they see the sculpture in the granite before, so it's like they're revealing or letting loose the sculpture. So I kind of think about that in terms of the image formation with my mixed media pieces. So that brings me to this next work. So as I mentioned before, I do describe myself as a painter and printmaker. So this work in particular, I would say that it leans a little bit toward my identity as a painter. And there's lots of different processes that are happening. This work is titled Queen Anne. It's collage and acrylic and carving on wood panel. A couple of things that are significant about this work. This is a portrait of my mother. Her name is Angela. We affectionately call her Anne, so she's a queen, so we're gonna title it Queen Anne. Throughout my recent pieces, I mentioned that I've been thinking about my identity as a mother, but that also lends me to bring into conversation the idea of a matriarch. Like, who can be a matriarch? Is it only relegated to women who have birthed children? But I like to extend beyond that, but thinking about people who are caretakers or people who have birthed ideas or birthed communities, right? Kind of extending this idea of what can be a matriarch and how I'm now functioning as a matriarch. So I've been thinking a lot about my cousins who I grew up with, spending like my summers at my grandma's house. We all running around now we're all mothers and we all have children. So thinking about this idea of legacy, and it's causing me to really think about the matriarchs in my family who have come before me. So this represents not only my biological matriarch, but also my art mothers, right? So if you look in the background of this piece, there's a reference to two of my art mothers. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Khaled is highly important, was very instrumental to the development of my practice, not only as a printmaker, but as an artist in general. So the work featured there, the kind of dark face there, is titled Black Girl. And then behind my mother's head is a drawing by Samela Lewis, who is also another amazing Black woman printmaker and scholar who is really responsible for kind of shaping and developing the Black art canon. And this is like the second instance where I am purposefully referencing other artists' work through my work. So this is kind of really significant in that regard. But just in terms of like the technical aspect of the work, you can see the wood grain in what I'm interpreting as the floor. You can see the striations in my mom's shirt and the pants. There's literally me carving away from the surface and then painting back into it. There's me of more of a traditional presence of me as a painter in the hands and in the face and in the hair. And then there's collage. So again, this really kind of mixed match of all these very different processes coming together. This next image is titled Sunday Morning. It's one of my most recent works that I finished at the tail end of 2023. So in thinking about my current solo exhibition that I have up at the Frist Art Museum, where the panels from Carving Out Time are on display, I was really thinking about what was not present in Carving Out Time, so what's missing. And one of the first things that I thought about is me, one, being able to rest, right? There's no moment in that work where I'm not serving somebody else or in the mode of creation or making or doing. So this represents that for me, just a moment of rest to be able to just kind of stop and enjoy things. So this, again, you see like the presence of our dining room table. That happens a lot. You see it in Carving Out Time. You see it in the Queen Anne piece that I just showed. It also shows up in this scene, again, this painting here. Things have kind of gotten a facelift, like the chairs are a different pattern. So again, just kind of thinking about this idea of how we make space and the things that are important to us. And this work also, again, leans itself a little bit more toward my identity as a painter, but there's still presence of printmaking there. It may be hard to see from this image, but if you're ever able to see this work in person, you can see that the bathrobe is carved, right? So just really thinking about texture and how to simulate that. So I really just treated that portion of the painting like I did a woodcut, right? So I painted one layer to get like the brighter color and then rolled it up just like I would a wood block to kind of get this darker color. Even like the pattern on the wallpaper, that's carved. The fuzzy slippers are carved again and painted. So just this really back and forth of really the problem solving of what method is best suited to interpret this particular texture or this particular part of the room. So those things just kind of like really excite me in the work. And then the last image that I'm going to show is my most recent work. Again, still thinking about in carving out time, what was missing from the day. And so just kind of showing our activity outside of the home. This work is titled Pinnacle. And it really documents kind of a nice family moment for us. We enjoy hiking and being outside, like around behind my studio, there's this really lovely park where we kind of go hiking. So anywhere where we go or when we visit home, we try to find somewhere to do a hike. So this particular location we're at the top of Pinnacle Mountain State Park. So this is and that's kind of like a tradition. Like if you're from Little Rock, like you've probably climbed Pinnacle Mountain at some point, or I've heard people talking about going to climb Pinnacle Mountain. And so this was the first time that we did it as a family with the boys. And so they were such troopers and made it to the top of the mountain. We were going to try to there's two ways, there's an easy way and a hard way. And so we decided, we have the boys, we'll do the easy way, but we accidentally took a wrong turn and ended up doing the hard way by accident, but they still made it to the top. So it's kind of like us recording this triumph for us as a family and also for them. They're at the top of the mountain. You see my husband is kind of sandwiched between our two sons, creating this kind of triangle shape that mimics the kind of triangle shape of the mountain behind us. But it really also, for me, is an honoring of my husband as well, him kind of being the pinnacle of our family, and also for me as well. But in terms of going back to this idea of process and technique, this is kind of, I would say, what I want to continue to do. So I'll kind of show a detail here. So you can see a close-up view. So it's still on the wood panel. I'm still activating it in the same way that I would do a woodcut. But the thing that is different, I'm more invested in color. I went through a long spell where I would just really focus on monochromatic and black and white and kind of having these limited color palettes. But I'm really interested in kind of bringing in more color and more flowers and foliage into my work. And that for me kind of symbolizes the journey of myself as an artist. I feel like a lot of the seeds that I planted and the hard work that I put in 4 or 5 years ago, all those things are starting to bloom and come to life. So you kind of see that happening in the work. With a lot of my recent works, there's always flowers or foliage or something of that nature present to kind of represent this phase in my life. But I'm still activating them as a woodcut, but at the same time, it also kind of functioned as an etching. Right, so kind of getting into some nerdy printmaking lingo here. But to achieve the color, first I carved all the panels like I would just normally activating a wood block, which you can see the tone of the flesh of the models in here. This is just the color of the wood. But in certain areas, depending on what color I wanted somebody's shirt to be, I would literally push media into those lines the same way that you would do an etching plate. Right, so with relief, it's printed on the top of the block. With etching, you push ink into the lines or into the crevices that you carve away to create the image. So I'm simultaneously working between these two ideas of thinking about woodcut, but also thinking about etching and then thinking about painting. So kind of, again, flowing between all these different media and processes. And so here's another detail where you can kind of get a sense of all of the processes and things that are happening within the work. And so this is kind of, the vein that I'm in right now. So I love my traditional printmaking, but I'm also just really into my mixed media work and kind of creating the challenge of, again, bringing all these very different processes together and just kind of a mesh of my identity as a painter and as a printmaker. So I think moving forward, you will continue to see more works that are in this vein. It's still kind of the core of all the things that I've been doing already, but presenting them in new and kind of still complex ways. I think that's all I have for you guys. I'm not sure what's next, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take questions from the audience in a few moments, but I've got some of my own. Share first, or explore first. Before we thank you to all of you again. This was just absolutely marvelous. And you each gave us just so many different pathways into the work, and this was just a really special moment. Before I pose some questions to the first two speakers, I wanted to give LaToya a chance to share with the audience So stepping back for a second and talk about the two parts of carving out time. So the set of wood blocks, which are on view right now at the Frist, but owned by the Baltimore Museum of Art, and then the prints that came from those wood blocks, and how those two parts are distinctive in terms of technique, but also conceptually for you.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, that work exists in two parts. So for the onset of that work, as I mentioned, I'm really interested in the print matrix as the art object. So really just putting the carving and the wood panels on display. So that was the initial goal for this work when I was given the opportunity to develop them for the exhibition that they debuted in at the Baltimore Museum of Art. But through the encouragement of my husband, we decided that it would be really important for them to be printed, just because, you know, there's never been, at least to our knowledge, there isn't like a woodcut done on that scale with this, at least with this theme. So we just kind of wanted to lean into like the monumentality of the project, but also kind of the historic nature of that as well. So from a technical standpoint, that kind of really posed some things that I had to think through. So one, if you just know about printmaking, whatever you print is going to be in reverse. Right? So if you think about like your hands, so this is the wood block, this is the paper, you print it, you have a mirror image, the same way your hands function. So I had to really make some, I don't want to say tough decisions, but I had to decide, like, for me, what was going to be the primary work and what was going to be the secondary work. And so I just kind of decided to stick with my theme of the blocks being the primary work. And so just from a conceptual standpoint, the block is always used as the tool that's going to produce something else. It's always in service of something else. And so as the person carving the work, you're always having to like look at the work backwards. A lot of printmakers reverse their image so that when it prints like the correct way. And so I didn't really want to rob myself of the experience of enjoying the imagery in the way that I wanted to enjoy the imagery. So I just kept with the idea of the panels being the primary work. And it kind of alludes to this idea of like the interior versus the exterior. So for me, the wood panels represent like the view of myself, the interior, how I see myself, how we see our family. But in essence, like the reverse image can also represent like the exterior view or how you can be perceived by other people. And in a lot of instances, thinking about just the experience of African American people in this country, a lot of times they're stereotyped as something that is completely the opposite of what our true nature or like what our true identity is. So from a conceptual standpoint, I can make it work just by thinking about like the reverse is like the interior or what other people could perceive like looking on the outside, whereas the panels are like the primary view or the primary voice of the work.
Thank you. One thing that struck me in your presentation today was this week you've talked a lot about being interested in the matrix as an art object, and I think hearing you speak today, it's as though you're interested in the matrix as the art object at rest, so not as a generative object anymore, right? Not producing the print, so being rolled up, and that's the art. That's the generative act, which is really quite very provocative. I had a question for you, Jovonna. I was wondering if you could say a little bit, and thank you, the words of Alice Walker as you were reading it was really powerful to think about the work through that lens. It's just so rich. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the sensorial, which seemed to be a point of a meeting point between Alice Walker and Hobbs's work. I liked what you were saying about her art not being able to be held, but that it overwhelms the visual field, right? It's more than your eyes can take in at once, right? All those details. And then the thematic of the garden and the overwhelming sensorial experience of the plants and so forth.
Let's see. I didn't expect Alice Walker to speak as much as she did today. That wasn't the intention until I was reading back over the piece. Originally, I was just going to reference Alice Walker. Like, it felt like such a connection that was right there. So I'm like, okay, yeah, we can build off Walker and we can keep it moving. But when I read the way Walker is moving towards not seeing her mother's creative labor, not feeling like she was able to see that from the space of childhood. And then when she's able to find it years later at the garden, and then that description of the garden that is so particular and so lush and so dense, when I read that, I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's that's that. And so I think that in terms of sensation, I didn't want to figure out the works as much as I just wanted to enjoy the overwhelm of it, I guess, the awe of it, especially because we're not in the house with you all. So these works are always going to have a different resonance for those who actually know you intimately and personally and have been in your home and are you and your sons and your husband. And so, and I think that that's beautiful to protect as well. So that in some ways I end that my comments with, I'm able to make myself more at home in a way, but also that I am at home in the feeling of beholding what's going on here. And that is allowing me to feel more in detailed ways and in big ways. And that I can bring with me. I might never be in your house, though if I'm in Baltimore, maybe I'll reach out. But like, I might never be in your house. But I can take that with me. And it is helping me change the ways I think about the interiors that I know well. And like the specific attention I pay to them. And just relishing in that, I guess. So it's the detail of it and the audacity of that much detail and the audacity of the size that I wanted to try to articulate.
Yeah, I was very much excited when you started talking about the garden and the flower reference, because those are like motifs that I've been purposely including in some of my more recent works over 2023 and kind of at the end of 2022. And also like flowers are a form of self-care for me. Like I always have like fresh flowers at home. It doesn't have to be like a special thing, but it's just kind of this small like moment of beauty that I'm able to give to myself. And really, again, just leaning into this idea of self-care, but from a more kind of realistic perspective. I think a lot of times we think self-care has to be these like grand gestures, like I'm gonna go spend a week at the spa or do a staycation somewhere, but those aren't always really realistic, especially for working women. Sometimes you don't have the weekend to just go away from your family, but I can like put this bouquet of flowers that I can pass at the table and just take a glance and like observe how beautiful they are. Or for me, it's also scented candles. Like my space can smell good. That's like a ritual for me in the studio. As soon as I get in the studio, I put lotions on my hand, I light my candle, and then like it's time to get to work. So it was really insightful to really hear you bring up the idea about the lushness of the garden, which is something that I really love. I love being outside and connecting with nature. I don't have a green thumb at all. Sadly, the only time my thumbs are green is when I'm painting. But I really do enjoy that aspect. And so just thinking about the experience of like self-care and the metaphor of looking at these pieces as like they're as lush as a vast garden. That was really
I'm glad. Well, I want to add to that. I got chills when I saw the flowers on the dining table in Queen Anne, because you say you don't have a green thumb, but the way that you rendered, and I don't know if those were, you could tell me if those were acrylic, if they were painted, or if they were I don't know how it works.
So in Queen Anne, it was a combination of collage and paints, and then in the one after that, Sunday Morning, it was all painted.
So there is where your green thumb happens, because they were just rendered so beautifully and just so realistic, but still very kind of fanciful in a way. I loved it.
Thank you.
Kéla, I loved what you gave to us with your structure, beauty as a method, beauty as a concept that was just so incredible. And part of what was so exciting about your presentation was that you didn't just talk about visual beauty. You said the lines dance, the lines dissolve, there's absence, and then you took us through past, present, and future melding and different physical iterations of beauty than just purely the visual. And I was just wondering if there was anything else you wanted to add about this idea of other worlds, not necessarily spiritual, but of the incorporation and opening up of other worlds.
Well, when I was thinking about beauty, I'm also thinking about sort of the value of it. And I think that's something that you're getting at in your earlier works, and it kind of continues through your process of how you're visualizing Black women and Black womanhood. And so when I'm thinking about the other worlds that you're creating, the lushness, like I can't get over that. And that home is a type of world building. So even just that little tidbit that you just gave us about putting the lotion on your hands and the scented candles, like I'm thinking about the world that you're creating in which you can create. Like I don't think we should take for granted the sort of the scene that you have to set in order to get to where you need to get to make the work that we're enjoying. And so even though you're, describing your home and you're presenting your family life, I think the idea of the world that you're creating on the canvas and what you're showing us and how you're transforming even the gallery space. When I think about the many times I've gone to a museum, I have never seen a Black family's world in that scale and that size with that level of care and detail ever. And so I think there's something very magical about the world that you're creating for us to live in and for us to enjoy. Like not even just a spiritual one, very material,
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's just like your conversations about beauty, because that was really like the focus of my thesis work while I was at Purdue, but particularly thinking about it through the lens of Black women and their beauty practices, whether they're informed by this idea of like internalized racism, right? So do we do the things we do because we really enjoy them, or because we've been taught that this is the way you present yourself, this is the way to be acceptable, this is the way to be beautiful, but really just kind of questioning, causing people, not to say that one is right or more right than the other, but really getting people to question, like, well, why do you do the things that you do? Have you ever questioned that? Or are you just on autopilot based on what people told you? And then the work really was to serve the purpose of presenting a different option of what can be beautiful. And I was doing that just through our hair texture, through adornment. I think about the women, like I treat them like we're at the salon, like when I'm doing my paintings or when I'm dressing them. I also pay a lot of attention to like people's adornment, like what earrings that we're wearing. Even if I like change something that's original from not to the original reference, there's a lot of care and attention that is placed on that. And just this idea of like how can we interpret beauty, but also at the point of not like trying to prove it, but just to embody it.
Yes.
So that was something that I struggled with, like with a lot of my research. It almost felt like I was trying to prove that we're worthy and all these things, and then it just got to a point where it's like, I mean, I can't prove anything to you, but I can just embody it. I can just be it, and then however you take it is however you take it. Yeah.
We're ready for some questions from the audience. Yes, Tiana, do we have a microphone? Oh, it's coming.
Somebody's coming.
It's coming. Yeah, just raise your hand if you've got a question, and the people with microphones will come.
Who is it?
Hi, really beautiful show. I'm also a printmaker and a painter, so I really appreciate the combination between both the printmaking aspect and painting, and also the use of the matrix as the main work of art. When I was looking at your paintings in the exhibition yesterday, it made me think of Carrie Mae Weems. And I don't know if you were looking at her photography as well. And then you mentioned the dining room table and the presence of that throughout your work. So I was wondering, if you could maybe speak more to that. And also as a printmaker, I'm just interested in your line work and the decisions that you made with the self-portrait, with the palette. I guess this is just more of a comment, but I love the way that you reproduced your own works and that the angle of the lines goes into perspective, the way that they, anyway, so that's a lot, but.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question and your comments. Ironically, I have been starting to think a little bit more about Carrie Mae Weems, because I am noticing the tables start to come back over and over and again. And it could just be the result of sometimes I don't have a model, so I use myself as the work to kind of convey themes. But yeah, I'm starting to notice the corner of the table is showing up in a lot of works, and it is kind of making me think about Carrie Mae Weems and her table series. So that I think that's something that I may start to read up on a little bit more. And then just in terms of the line work you mentioned, a lot of the decisions really just come from just basic drawing skills, like things that you teach, like at least I teach my students in like, foundation drawing, like line, texture, shape, form, value, but trying to translate that through the medium or through the element of line is like really important. So for me, that kind of represents like the problem solving of the medium. And I think we all have our own versions of that, depending on whatever type of medium that you're working with. So it is really is a matter of like becoming, like having this sense of like intimacy with the subject, like really taking time to look at it and investigate it. And I think about often like if somebody from my audience was holding this thing, like how would that feel? And trying to replicate that feeling through the mark making. Yeah. Thanks.
First of all, I just want to say that your work is visually stunning, engaging, and it's quite remarkable. And I think most of us who get the opportunity to see this are quite moved by your work. I also have some questions about the technical way you approach your work. It shows a very different image of you. Is that because you've changed, or is that because when you approach the subject, you see more of a mirror image of yourself?
A lot of the thing, like the reversal of things, is again just, you have to chop it up to the nature of printmaking itself. And so there's always this like idea of like thinking about it in reverse. That's one of the reasons why I don't use text a lot in my work, because when you're planning out your image, you have to draw it backwards and reverse when you're drawing it, and then so it can print the right way. So I don't know, I kind of avoid it. And also just in my normal work, like even just like my smaller pieces, I don't take the like extra step to reverse the image beforehand. It's really not that important to me. And also it kind of gives me like a little bit of a surprise, right? Because you're seeing it in a different way. Because I've spent so much time with the block and seeing it in one orientation, the print work is almost like it's still a surprise, even though I know what the imagery is going to be. I think there was a question.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
First of all, I've been following your work for years. I'm such a huge fan. To me, you're a woodcut goddess. I'm a woodcut artist myself, and figurative, and it blows my mind. And I have, a kind of nerdy woodcut question for you, which is basically how detailed is your drawing on the block, and how much are you figuring it out as you're going? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's very detailed. Like I spend a lot of time on the drawings. Like the drawings could be the finished product if I like wanted to just show the drawings. And I feel like because the work is so detailed and there's a lot going on, I really take a lot of time to investigate the drawing itself so that it creates just a clearer pathway when I get to the carving process. So as you know, like once it's gone, right? So, when in doubt, don't cut it out. That's what I always tell people just starting woodcuts. So yeah, there's a lot of time that happens. So just in terms of like process, I've said over the past maybe 4 years, I've started the process of just painting my panels black first before I go into the carving. So the traditional way is that you have your wood surface. Some people like sand it and like shellac it. You may draw with a Sharpie. And then some people stain it with a red, a red dye or something like that. That was just too confusing for me with the red, because I started to kind of think about myself as a painter, because there was like 3 values present, right? There's the wood, there's the black of the Sharpie, and then there's this red. So it kind of just created like too much. And so I tried it that way, and I was like, I don't understand why people do that. But I said, well, it just makes sense if it's going to be a black and white print anyway. Why don't you just start with the black surface and you do your drawings with a white pencil, because it's closest to what the end product is going to be. So with these panels in particular, they're cherry wood panels. All of the panels are 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide. 3 of them come together to make the scene. So when my husband was helping me set up the studio, we put all 3 panels on the wall at one time. So they're already painted black by the time they go up on the wall. And then from there, just a really detailed drawing with this white water-soluble pencil takes place. And some things like I just kind of will make notes, like in the dinner scene, for example, like I didn't have to draw like the squares white, because that's just kind of unnecessary label, but I did write white on the square, maybe just do a little zigzag or something like that. But definitely on the figures, like the details on the clothes, anything that was like small in detail, like the artwork, those things were like really, really drawn in. But if it was just something like, I didn't take time to like draw in every single part of the chair. I just kind of made notes and did like shading because, you know, that's taking away from my time to get into the carving. But yeah, to answer your question, like the drawing is like very extensively done before I get into the carving process.
Thank you. Can I ask one more little question?
Sure.
So are you working sometimes upright and sometimes you're down on the floor?
For the large pieces, they're always upright.
Always upright.
To start,
Okay.
yeah. So in like the video in the gallery and also on the video on my YouTube page, you see sometimes I'm working on the floor, but that was at the point where like all the carving had already done. And so I was kind of like maybe just touching up some things like on the floor or something like that. But for the initial like round of drawing and carving, they're always up on the wall because that just gives me the ability to step back from it, which students step away from your work while you're working, just so you can see everything. And you're also able to like notice your mistakes better when you step away from it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Ms. Hobb. My question for you is, how did you arrive at the concept of bringing your family into your work? I know, like in the Black community, family is very private, but I really appreciate it because it makes me appreciate my mother as well, and all of the things and all of the hats my mother wore when I was much younger. So how did you arrive at the idea to showcase this? Because not a lot of Black mothers receive their flowers.
Yeah, so for me, it's just really because it's my life. And I think earlier in the gallery today, somebody brought up the idea of like vulnerability. And I think for me, that is really the power of the work, because it does give you the opportunity to, again, to think about your own situation, like your own parents or your experience as a child. So for me, it was just like really natural. So I am showing you the intimacy, but it's also like not everything, right? Because, you know, some rooms just really aren't that clean. Like right now, like I will be, you know, there may or may not be laundry baskets like beside the couch waiting to be folded when I get back home. So it's still like an authentic look, but also there's still some things that we're still like preserving or holding back at the same time. But yeah, I think the vulnerability of it and the realness of it is, again, where the power and the strength lies. But then that's also coupled with the care that I am putting into just the development of the imagery and like the details. So there's, yeah, just a lot of like care. So I like describe this work as a labor of love, really, like love for my medium, also love for the people that I'm representing. Like I feel like it's an honor to do a portrait of someone, and for me it's like my duty, or it's like my job to really present them like in the way, you know, that I see them. It's like, I don't know, it's almost a disservice if I don't portray you in this kind of like really detailed, really specific way. So. Good to see you, by the way. There's a question here in the middle of the aisle.
Much. Thank you for presenting your work. I really am just taking it all in. And I wanted to ask you about maybe one of the obvious things, which is just the huge scale. I mean, did you go from obviously smaller form? Was this the first time that you worked on such a large scale? And maybe talk about what that transition was from a smaller to a large scale in your prints.
Yeah, so I just enjoy working large scale. Like this just really excites me. Like even in undergrad, I was the student like toting the big like canvas across campus to my painting classes. So yeah, I just really enjoy the scale of the work. This work in particular is inspired by a suite of prints by Kara James Marshall. So at the time, I first experienced that work in 2014, and in my own practice, I had just finished graduate school at Purdue University, and we were then just good friends then, but now we're husband and wife. But we were on a trip in New Orleans, and we saw the 40 Americans exhibit when it was traveling for the Rubles collection. So at the time, the largest woodcut I had done was 8 feet by 4 feet. It was a large figure of a woman like holding this cloth, partially nude on this like 8 by 4 feet block. And so seeing the Kéla Jackson Marshall work, like I just no concept of a woodcut being done that large and in color. So yeah, that was really like instrumental in me in terms of like bringing this work to fruition for the scale in particular. Was there a second part to your question? I'm sorry, I just kind of started rambling.
No, I was just interested more in kind of what brought you to kind of bringing it to a lens. And I wanted to say a comment that I felt like to me it's very sculptural the way you talk about the woodcuts. I love hearing you talk about it as an object and that you really see it as sort of a project.
Yeah, I also really love clay. Like in like undergrad, that was like one of my other like favorite classes to take, is like the ceramics class and like my sculpture class. I decided not to do that because I didn't like the fact that I needed a kiln to do my work. And so I'm very much into like, I don't know, I just like being able to do things on my own, and printmaking was like, I guess the best medium. Like it's good to have a press, but if you don't have a press, you can still do printmaking. And I don't need other people around to be able to do it. So that was kind of one of my hesitations of not like really leaning into sculpture. But when I'm forming these images and like drawing and carving, sometimes I'm thinking about if I'm shaping this with clay, like what direction will my hand be moving the clay? So then that becomes like the direction that I make the line go. So if I have an arm, it's a cylindrical shape. So the line should move like a cylinder. Or if I'm going down the side of the face, if I would mold the clay down like this, so that's the same direction that I make the lines go. So really playing with this idea of like contour and cross contour. And then I guess going back to the scale, when I was making this work, I kind of felt like I was still like a really like largely unknown artist. But at the same time, I felt like I had the skill. I don't know, I just felt like I wasn't as far along in my career as I wanted to be, or maybe I wasn't as like widely known as I wanted to be. And so when I was invited to do this show at the Baltimore Museum of Art, I really thought like, this is like, I don't know, there's just some moments where you have these like opportunities that are life-changing, and I saw this as one. I was like, this is a time like wherever you were gonna show out, like you need to show out in this show. And so I actually came up with the idea for that work before I was offered the exhibition, but telling her about that work, the curator who invited me to be a part of the exhibition, and kind of like sealed the deal for her and made her really excited to give me support to get that work done. And yeah, so I just like, this is an opportunity, like you really need to take advantage of this. And I often kind of think about Kéla Jackson Marshall, some of his lectures. He talks about like you have to know how to play the game. And if you want to be a museum level artist, you have to show works that would necessitate being in a museum. So yeah, and I think this work like feels that like some people can get noticed with a whisper, but some of us have to shout to get noticed. And so I just really saw this as like a really, really important opportunity, because I was already starting to get some traction. Like I had just gotten some like really significant residencies. I had just won like a major art prize in my city. So I felt like the momentum was starting to go, but like this was like a really, really good opportunity to get more eyes on your work, to get more visibility, and to create something that people have not seen before, but still doing it in a way that you're not compromising yourself. You're not doing something that's just a fad. That's very big for me. Like I don't do stuff just because it's popular. I do things that I'm passionate about, and really playing on my skills. Like what am I good at? What can I do that you don't always see, right? Because there's a lot of like artists making figurative work, a lot of Black artists doing Black portraiture, but what am I contributing to the conversation that people don't see often? And, you know, in shows, you don't always see like printmaking, right? Or carving. And so like I carve really well. Like I'm kind of humble, so I don't always like say things like that, like in public. But so I know that I can carve, and so like let me just put that thing to the forefront, because that's something that not a lot of people can do on that same type of level.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? With the clay, you say you think about how you might mold the clay and then you, do people do that? Is that a thing? Or did you organically start doing that?
I don't know if it's a thing with other people. It's just kind of, I just think about like other things and how they relate to what I'm doing.
That's brilliant. And it really is, because something that I was thinking about when you were showing the pieces, both in Queen Anne and then also, Erin Anaya and hydrangeas. So I was paying attention even with the work of you holding your son and the work of you in the morning. There's this, when you do serenity in a face, you do it so well, and it doesn't look like you're trying to depict peace, depict serenity. And there's something like about the skin and about the way that it moves that just feels so organic. And I'm trying to make sense of how is that related to wood or paper? How is she doing this? And so then when you talk about how you think about molding, how would you do this with clay? And then making the mark in that direction, I'm like, oh, there it is. And so there's just something about that hybridity that is revving me up. I think that's so brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it also lends it to like how I think about drawing, how I think about painting. I don't separate how I think about them, right? So, some people when they're getting ready to do a block, they may like, okay, I'm drawing this way because I'm doing a block, or I'm drawing this way because I'm about to do a painting. The foundation of the work is the drawing. I don't think about them differently because I'm about to do one thing or the other. So I'm very much like, I see tones and value shifts really well, which I think is a key component to people who do like portraiture really well. If you think about painters, they're like able to notice these like really small, subtle changes in like the curve of a lip or the change like of a shadow or a light. So that's how I process the imagery, is like through these value changes, shifts. Whereas somebody like my husband, he's really good with like line, like cross-hatching and things. So I have to take that sensibility of how I just naturally see images and how I naturally think about the imagery coming together, but just trying to translate that through like the lines. I'm really into all the lines like blending, folded into each other. So this kind of like this, in drawing we call it continuous tonality. So I'm thinking about the continuous tone, but through linear tonality, if that makes sense.
So in Queen Anne, when you did your mother's face, did you also mean to kind of mimic, I don't know if I'm using the right term, the values or the tones that Catlet does in the piece behind her? Because I actually see they're very different, but I was noticing, I'm like, wait, I see something, there's something that's parallel here.
No, it's just like the spirit draws me. Sometimes like you don't notice things in the work until after you do them, but for me it's very, I'm just kind of like an intuitive process. Because even like looking at carving out time and talking about it to people, like I was saying things and I was like, oh, like I didn't even really notice that about it when I was making the images, but now like it all kind of makes sense. Like in the boys' room, I didn't even make the connection like that there's a Basquiat dinosaur picture, but then there's a dinosaur on the floor. Like I didn't even make that connection until you see in the work again, like up. Like I didn't even really think about that. So sometimes it's like intuitive decisions, and then when you kind of step back and look at them, you're like, oh yeah. There's all these kind of like connections and through lines. And I like the fact that other people have said that, every time they look at the work, they see something different in the work. And so, yes, I really enjoyed that aspect as well.
Cool.
Hi, I have a question over here. I thank you so much for the work, and I really appreciate all the sort of symbolism that you put into these different pieces. And I was just noticing now that you sort of have a halo around yourself in the last image, and the sort of triptych nature of your pieces. It's really reminding me of sort of like religious iconography and the grandiose scale of it, and you're sort of now putting the Black home in a sort of a state of being worshipped. And I'm just sort of wondering, how are you choosing the objects or people or relationships or things to sort of venerate in the modern age? Like, how are you choosing that?
Well, in this particular, going back to your comment about the halo, like there was a period of time where like the halos were like a constant motif in my work, and that is kind of a result of my experience as an art history student in undergrad, like lots of portraits of people like with halos like everywhere. So that just kind of naturally seeped into my work. And so off and on, I kind of bring them back into the space or into the work. But in terms of like just really thinking about how to construct these environments that I'm presenting to you, and you just really think about like what types of things do you have attachment to, one. And then secondly, like, can I actually carve those things? Like, how would they work, like texturally? I also had to think about the color of things, like, because I knew it was going to be like not color, but just value. So you have to think about like the color of things. So I purposely, like in all of the scenes, I have on a white shirt. That's, you know, purposeful, like to make me stand out in the scene. I always have these black pants on. So there's like also like value choices or color choices that you just have to think about in terms of like the image formation of like being an artist and thinking about composition, right? There's the theme and all the things that you have to put in it, but it's also like the literal part of how do I make the work. So a lot of those things are like very, very intentional, but some of the things were just like my favorite hoodie at the time, or the house shoes that my son had just gotten for Christmas, the dragon house shoes, or their favorite toys. And also just at the same time, like what would look good aesthetically, like putting all these things together. And also for me, just the personal challenge of having to try having as many different types of surface textures, quality, just to kind of like, you know, challenge yourself. Like, can you carve these fuzzy house shoes and make them look fuzzy? Be believable. Like, can you make this granite countertop look like it's granite? So just, you know, just a personal challenge of like pushing yourself, right? Because that's where the growth happens and where the problem solving happens. So I would say like, you know, I had already done a lot with my carving, but this just gave me like so many opportunities to learn and grow and challenge myself and push myself even more.
Hi, Ms. Hobbs. I just want to say that you're really an inspiration.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Would you like me to stand?
I see you now. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that you're an inspiration for me as a young artist who's also a printmaker. I wanted to ask, have you ever considered doing reduction on this large scale?
No.
Yeah.
That is something that I have like wanted to get back into. And actually I was at a 6-week printmaking residency over the summer at Women's Studio Workshop. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to do, but I like ran out of time. I was like, as you can tell, I'm overly ambitious. And so I had like all these projects. Had like 15 things, and it's been a while since I've just been purely in the mode of printmaking. So I forgot about, I have to tear paper, and if I do multiple colors, I have to let this dry before I can move on to the next thing. So I was just kind of reminded of some things in printmaking that I hadn't had to do in a while. But I did have on my list to do a reduction cut, not this big, but just to kind of get back into some older processes that I haven't done in a while. I also love monotype. That's another thing that I do in terms of printmaking. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing a litho for the first time since undergrad. So you get to see like a little bit more of like the drawing aspect of myself, but through the medium of print. So it is on my list to get back to, but not this big. That would be something interesting to explore though.
Okay, last question. Have you considered printing on different type of mediums like cardboard or fabric?
Yeah, I have done that. So not undergrad, but in graduate school, I went through a phase of like printing on fabric. So when Walmart still had their fabric section, I would just kind of go and raid the scraps. So I have a lot of prints on muslin. I have a lot of things on like faux suede I have. And these like things that people haven't seen, but yeah, I've kind of done all of those things. And some of that was out of just one, the curiosity of how I can do these different surfaces, but also at the same time, like I went through this phase where I was, again, thinking about melding the painting and printmaking. So I was treating my prints, but then stretching them like you would stretch a canvas. So I went through like a little bit of phase of that. So yeah, I don't do that as much now, just I'm really into like the wood panel. But yeah, I've experimented with different surfaces as well.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I just wanted to have a comment and a question. So the comment is just to thank you so much. Wonderful to see, as a Black woman in the art world, to see the three of you up there. So just thank you, and I hope to see more of this as we continue on, representing ourselves in the art world. Also, just to Ms. Hobbs, thank you for presenting the Black woman in a restful way in some of your paintings or your prints. You know, here she's stretching. You know, it's often when I see art sometimes of us as Black women, I see pain in the pictures, and so you're giving me joy in your pictures. You're giving me power, especially the one in the right bottom of this frame. It's just, it makes me feel great to look at your work. So thank you for that. And I guess my question is, the last piece that you showed with a lot of color in it, it had the blue sky. And I was wondering how you did that, because there didn't seem to be, you know, any carvings in that, or if that was just painted, or how did you do that?
Yeah, so that was, well, thank you so much for your comments. And yeah, I think that's a goal of mine. Like, we're multifaceted people, so we can experience the whole gamut of emotions. But with the piece that you're talking about is Pinnacle. So again, that is like really me kind of flowing in between like painting and printmaking. And so when I'm thinking about an image, I really have to think about like the order of operations. So something that I like to do is like, if there's gonna be like carving and painting and collage, I try to have some evidence of that early in the process. So I'm always comparing things to each other, because like, you know, with the carving, I don't want to wait. I don't want to do the carving first and then I put like the bright blue and then the carving doesn't look how I intended it to look, because I'm comparing it with this intense color. So after I did the initial drawing with the white pencil, the blue was one of the first things that happened on the page. So my husband, he has experience like with mural work, so he helped me like mix the blue. I told him like, this is what I need. He went and found the colors, helped me mix the blue, masked off the figures, and then we just did like a roll with like a roller, a big like paint roller, to get all that blue down first, and then pull that up, and then now I have like this intense blue that I'm comparing everything else to in the work. And then same thing else, like after I did the blue, then I just put in like the green of the trees, even though I knew there was more work that I had to do, but I just wanted some like evidence of every major element that's going to be in the work. So I'm always bringing up all the image together, and nothing is like an afterthought, and everything seems harmonious and relates to each other. Everything feels like it belongs in the space together, because I'm bringing everything up at the same time. But yeah, that is just paint. But the clouds are a combination of like painting and carving together. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Jovonna, Kéla, LaToya, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.